Nah, kemudian kan memang di Perpres 80 2019 kawasan ini kan ditetapkan sebagai Science Technopark. Maka kita butuh banyak scientific, termasuk di dalamnya ya itu harus di-create oleh perguruan tinggi. Maka di sini memang kita peruntukan untuk nanti kompleks Human Development Estate sama Science Technopark nanti di sini. Nanti kita melihat beberapa lokasi tanah yang bisa kita kerjasamakan dan nanti detailnya akan kita tindak lanjuti dengan PKS lebih lanjut.
Ya, ini kesempatan kami juga saya sampaikan terima kasih pada Bapak Bupati Trenggalek yang telah memberikan kesempatan pada kami mempunyai living lab katanya. Konsep-konsep yang selama ini biasanya kita diskusikan di kelas atau di media massa mungkin bisa diterapkan di sini. Dan saya yakin apa yang dijadikan visi dari Pak Bupati tadi menggunakan pendekatan ilmiah, konsep-konsep, dan yang kedua juga bagaimana membangun daerah ini menjadi sebuah ekosistem inovasi itu akan cukup menarik. Kalau melihat dari potensi yang ada, tentu ekosistem ekoturisme yang paling tepat yang bisa dibangun di sini. Ekosistem ini berarti tidak hanya orang-orang terampil, keterlibatan dari Pemda, tentu butuh investor, butuh banyak hal yang bisa mensupport sehingga orang tertarik untuk datang ke lembah Tinom Wilis ini. Tadi sempat saya lihat, wah bangunannya otentik semua gitu. Apakah ini sudah ada sejarahnya gitu? Kalau misalnya belum, nah ini adalah kerjaan dari teman-teman di industri kreatif untuk menciptakan sejarah tersebut, menulis ulang ya sejarah dan bisa menjualnya, menarasikannya kepada masyarakat sehingga mereka bisa hadir di sini dan tentunya akan berdampak secara ekonomi untuk pemerintah dan masyarakat Trenggalek.
Ini ada di lereng Gunung Wilis, di Lem Wilis, satu kawasan yang insya Allah Sekolah Pasca Sarjana UNER akan membuat satu tata kelola yang punya dampak ekonomi, sosial, sekaligus lingkungan. Apalagi meroket itu kan ekosistemnya yang berkelanjutan. Semangat ya.
adanya visi Bapak Bupati melakukan pemberdayaan perempuan dikaitkan dengan SDG, mulai mengandalkan pariwisata dan lain-lain, itu saya rasa sejalan dengan visi kami untuk mengembangkan pemimpin-pemimpin transformatif. Yang pertama tentu menyamakan frekuensi, bagaimana membuat Trenggalek bisa semakin bagus di bawah kepemimpinan Gus Bupati, dan yang kedua juga bagaimana antara pemimpin dan followership-nya juga berpikir yang sama untuk mentransformasi Trenggalek yang semakin bagus. Tadi dari beberapa kesepakatan, insya Allah kami akan meluangkan banyak energi, pikiran, dan ide-ide untuk Kabupaten Trenggalek pun di pemerintahan itu juga akan bisa saling mengisi dengan program-program yang ada di Kabupaten Trenggalek.
Dan juga menyesuaikan dengan apa yang telah kita bahas dalam kesepakatan bersama dengan pihak lain yang telah kita laksanakan.
Sini ya kayaknya banyak gitu yang diayahi, tapi saya ingin fokus memang di Selingkar Wilis ini. Karena apa? Karena saya ingin punya basis sains di sana, dan harapan saya ya kalau banyak owner nggak lengkap lah masalahnya punya center of lembaga apa yang
Terima kasih telah berkunjung secara virtual pada Sekolah Pasca Sarjana Universitas Airlangga. Kami berkomitmen untuk mengembangkan pemimpin yang transformatif. Berbeda dengan sekolah pasca sarjana lain maupun program-program studi S2 dan S3 yang lain, kami melakukan inovasi dengan membuat Student Development Program. Kami membangun berdasarkan 9 kompetensi yang dihasilkan oleh Hay Group, yang menjadi ciri khas dari lulusan sekolah pasca sarjana. Yang pertama adalah berkolaborasi, yang kedua memberikan solusi yang kreatif dan kreatif problem solving, dan seterusnya. Ada 9 dan itu bisa kita monitor, dan kita memang menyediakan program khusus agar lulusan-lulusan kami memang menjadi pemimpin yang transformatif dan membuat dunia lebih baik, menjadikan kami sebagai institusi yang berkelas dunia yang mengembangkan pemimpin transformatif dan berdampak bagi dunia yang lebih baik.
Sekolah Pasca Sarjana yang lahir pada tahun 1982 memiliki nama sebelumnya Fakultas Pasca Sarjana. Sekolah Pasca Sarjana yang merupakan lintas disiplin ilmu yang menjadi bagian penting UNAIR di dalam mempersiapkan generasi masa depan yang terampil dan berpengetahuan luas.
Hello.
Hello, Doctor. Good morning there.
Hi, good
How have you
afternoon.
been?
I thought I was just gonna check if the volume and the audio connection is
Okay, go ahead, please.
all right. I can hear you and see you well. Is it the same on your
All right, good, great.
All right. Looks like it's all set.
So let me greetings to everybody. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon for those of you who are in Indonesia, and good morning for those of you who are in Turkey. So before we start, I would like to ask permission to Dr. Sinan. If you don't mind, this activity would be recorded. Is it okay for you?
Sure, sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Operator, mungkin bisa di-record. Great. First of all, on behalf of Postgraduate School Airlangga University, I would like to say much appreciated to Dr. Sinan Akili for your willingness to give an academic contribution in our very first institutional collaboration between Postgraduate School Airlangga University and Cappadocia University. My name is Safira Amalia. I'm staff of International Partnership Unit Postgraduate School Airlangga University. I also graduated from Airlangga University in the title of Bachelor of Sociology. So for those of you who are not familiar yet with our marvelous speaker today, Dr. Sinan Akili, he is an assistant professor in the Department of English Language and Literature, as well as the director of the School of Graduate Studies and Research at Cappadocia University. So yeah, without any further ado, let's begin for today's guest lecture. Dr. Sinan would be talk in 45 minutes, following up with 15 minutes Q&A session in the topic of horse-human entanglements in the English novel of the Anthropocene. Dr. Sinan, please, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just quickly set my timer then. All right. Yes, good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. Well, before I start, I would actually like to thank the administration of Airlangga University and especially of the postgraduate school for this very kind invitation. It's truly a pleasure and honor for me to be giving this lecture today as the first, let's say, the fruition of this very recent institutional collaboration. I'm hoping that this will be the first of many future events that we will organize together. So it's really, thank you very much for the invitation. So again, for the sake of using my time productively and efficiently, and thank you very much for the nice introduction as well. I will just try to give a very general frame of reference for my talk today, which is in fact a kind of a reflection of my recent work in this field that is emerging and gaining velocity very rapidly, critical animal studies, an interdisciplinary area, obviously, covering or transdisciplinary even, drawing from natural sciences, literary studies, cultural studies, etc. I know your institution there is also quite transdisciplinary and open to innovative research. So basically, my work is within these larger efforts to understand the human being's relationship with, to use the correct term, with the more than human world, in every aspect, including works of literature. And obviously with the ongoing climate crisis, the degradation of the planetary systems, of the Earth system, and the loss of biodiversity, all of these are really effective in this growing interest in these fields. So, well, I mean, my particular topic is going to be the horse-human entanglements in the early, like in the English novel of the early Anthropocene. And I'll try to explain the terms as I go and hopefully stay on the slides. And if I can start, then I hope you can see my screen here.
Exactly, we can see clearly.
Okay, all right. So yeah, let me, without further delay, let me just begin. So that is my title, and I try to, you know, kind of explain or give some ideas about the content by using the visuals here. And my starting point for this is a very famous scholar in the debate surrounding the rise of the novel as a genre, Leonard Davis, and his, very influential book, Factual Fictions. He writes about this striking image that is the gaunt figure of a man on a horse, out of place and out of time, seems to cast its shadow over any discussion of the European novel. And I'm assuming that at least some of the audience will be familiar with this sketch of, Pablo Picasso of Don Quixote, a late Renaissance mock romance that kind of is also, according to some scholars, is the source or some prototype of the novel that emerged in the 17th century, or late 17th, early 18th century, basically. So this man on a horse is my starting point, and its influence on the European novel. So my talk today will basically be divided into two sections, in which I'll try to make 2 points. The point one is the relationship between horses and the rise of the novel as a genre. And I'll try to explain the dependence of the novel on the horses in the early Anthropocene, which I call actually early Anthropocene, from about 1740s to 1850s, about a little more than a century. But in the middle of this period, we have James Watt's, Scottish engineer James Watt's invention of a working steam locomotive that has changed, obviously, the world, and horses began to be replaced with horsepower. That's the unit of measurement that we still use today. And then by iron horses, as they were known in the 1840s, familiarly, locomotives. And what's interesting is that this is also the period in which the English novel rapidly grew into maturity. Another scholar on this, Michael McKeon, he says, with the works of Richard Fielding and Richardson in the 1740s, he says the English novel comes to the end of its origins and begins to enter new territory. And I'll try to explore this territory with reference to Henry Fielding's novel, Joseph Andrews. Those who are in the humanities or in the literary studies, I'm hoping, are familiar with these titles. Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey and Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. So kind of reflecting the beginning, the middle, and the end of that period that I call the early Anthropocene. And this work is soon to be published. Most of the ideas with a twist on the issues of extraction as well, is soon to be published by Bucknell University Press in this edited volume, Planet Work, Rethinking Labor and Leisure in the Anthropocene, edited by Ryan Heidegger. The second section is going to be on the Darwinian Revolution and how it impacted, to put it very roughly, the perception of dead horses, or even the representations, because the breakthroughs of the Darwinian Revolution reveal this ontological affinity and continuity between humans and animals, or non-human animals, who were, as to quote from Darwin himself, different only in degree, but not in kind. After this revolution, I kind of observed that the authors reflect on the loss of a horse and how this loss could create ruptures in the narrative progression of their novels. And for this, I borrow our professor Serpil Opperman and Serenella Iovino's term narrative agency of this horse Wildfire in George Eliot's Silas Marner, and this other horse, Prince, and Thomas Hardy's Tess of D'Urbervilles. Again, so these are still within the 19th century, but that is also the beginning and end of that long period. And my work on this, so the first section is on the living horse, and the second section is on the dead horse, or equine mortality. And this has already, my work on that has already been published as a chapter in Equestrian Cultures, Horse-Human Society, and the Discourse of Modernity, edited by Kristen Guest and Monica Matfield. This came out from the Chicago University Press, I think in 2020, early 2020. So I'm basically sharing with you some highlights from my most recent research. Well, my main point is that horses, whether living or dead, were extremely powerful agents in the English novel of the 18th and 19th centuries. And to very quickly explain why horses, I guess it would be nice to remember that they had a place in human society and human history that is unmatched by any other non-human animal. Of course, I mean, we've been living together with the dogs longer than the humans, but it's a different story. I mean, the domestication of the horse is more recent, but the things that we can do with a horse and a dog together with them are different. I mean, even today, the only sport activity that humans perform with another animal is horseback riding. And there's a reason why we have these in ancient mythologies images of the centaurs, for instance. But it's also useful so with that much amount of permeation in our life and culture, it's a useful focus for considering animal agency in literature, because they have occupied a central place, even in the human imagination since primordial times. I mean, there's one critic who actually claimed that the history of literature as a whole could be read as an attempt to define the role of the horse in human culture. Of course, I mean, depending on where you start the history of literature from, this remark needs some periodization, because like the domestication of the horse is like in the last it took place like 7,000 to 8,000 years ago. And literature obviously goes back earlier. And then why dead horses needs a little explanation, but then to explain that I think because this is how humans are. I mean, we understand the value of something without only when we lose it. So one needs to see the value encoded in the living horses in that period. And there, in fact, despite all this machinery, there were increases in the use of horses after the Industrial Revolution that were prompted by industrialization. I mean, one would think that it would be the otherwise, but no. In urban centers, where the local transport of goods and people was undertaken by horse-drawn vehicles, this is from Gina Dori's work, these horses constituted a part of the urban working classes in these newly industrialized cities. They were undernourished, overworked, and kept in dank, cramped, and squalid quarters. In the rural countryside too, they continued to perform both agricultural labor and continued to be necessary for short distance travel. And all of these you'll see resonations or reflections in the text that I'm going to go over. So, but the bottom line is, across English society, the horses maintained significant use value despite the increased use of machinery. And equine mortality, to explain why dead horses, it was an event that one was very likely to witness in everyday life. In her very influential study, Hannah Welton says it took only 3 years for cab horses to become exhausted if they hadn't already dropped dead in the streets. I mean, it was a very common sight to see a horse dropping dead in the streets at the time. So the horse, in short, remained a signifier of social status in the countryside, and prestige among the landed gentry, the aspiring middling ranks, the tenant farmers, yeomen, and the tradespeople. And a kind of a sign value and an exchange value were ascribed to horses in that period. And so even in the age of the iron horse, and the death of a flesh and blood horse, I say, meant a great loss, whether the horse in question was valued for its flesh, its muscle power, or for its bloodlines, as would be the case of the race horses. So at this point, my question in this work is, what happens if you look at works of literature as products of these interspecies dependence and entanglements of the human and non-human animals, and also take into account the roles of matter and semiosis in this production as well. Now, my kind of response to this is that we can only understand this when we put the Anthropocene context in dialogue with the rise of the novel debate and adopt a critical position informed by quantum physicist philosopher Kara Barad's gentile realism. And well, again, to refer to this other critic who claimed that the entire history of literature can be read as an attempt to understand horse-human relationships, he also says, we might see literature as a plane on which there occurs a confusion and conflation of humans and animals. I mean, these sound a little abstract, but I'll try to explain. But then the Anthropocene, I mean, the term is gaining more visibility and familiarity, but I thought I would just very quickly explain what that means. The age of a new, the name of a new geological age defined by the profound and unprecedented impact of the Homo sapiens activity on our planet since the Industrial Revolution. I mean, there are other people who, start this history from other points, but the majority take the Industrial Revolution with Paul Crutzen's and Sturmer's work. So it basically means the age of humankind, which can be visible even and seen in the geological layers. But there are, I mean, the concept is criticized by people like Rustic, for instance, because calling this age the age of humankind is some kind of narcissistic, again, some anthropocentric, some human-centered view of what we are doing. So she refers to the myth of Narcissus in Greek mythology, like this man, like who fall in love with his own image, looking at the pond. Rustic says the pond itself does not exist for Narcissus. The trees and sky above the pond do not exist. All that exists is the gazer enwrapped by his own image. I mean, so the critique of this term is, even though, I mean, we're trying to question our impact on the planet, we again still assume that it was just the humans who were effective on this history. But no, I mean, even though they too played a central role in how the Anthropocene emerged. Again, I'm quoting from these critics. The role and place of animals has so far received relatively little attention. I mean, it's gaining more attention these days since the time I started working on this. Critical animals studies is really, gaining ground. Therefore, we need to start seeing this period in history as being co-authored by humans and animals, and the deep interspecies entanglements as one of its defining traits. These interspecies entanglements is my keyword also in the title. But I do something slightly different. I take this co-authoring analogy quite literally. Like the horses and humans wrote literature together, and argue that the horses had a major role in the rise and maturation of the novel as a distinct literary genre. Because, I mean, that is still debated, and I mean, people ask if there's more to be said about the novel, and I might kind of argue that yes, we can still add to the rise of the novel debate if we acknowledge the agency of non-human animals and consider the functions of matter and semiosis. In an age, improved printing technologies caused an explosion of science in Britain. I call this a semioactive explosion. And after all, it was Daniel Defoe himself who in 1726 had announced that the printing art has outrun the pen and may pass for the greatest improvement of its kind in the world. You know, this revolution in the printing technologies. But then again, what really is a printed novel is another question to ask. And with the recent material turn in the humanities, there's a change of perception. I mean, Robertson, for instance, recently considered print materials as marked surfaces that underwrite a social agreement. And that work is not self-reportedly informed by post-human theories, but it corresponds to what Karen Barad, whom I mentioned earlier, means by this term material discursivity in her agential realism concept. In other words, this view illustrates a redefinition of print material, such as a novel, as the human animals, discursive engagement and entanglement, and even interaction, another term Karen Barad uses, as different from interaction, which assumes the separateness of the two entities that are, in engagement with one another. Interaction is is different. It acknowledges the entanglement with matter as well. So it kind of rejects any static and individual existence or pre-existence, causality or agency, and in her rejection of this essential separateness of the word and thing, human and non-human, and discourse and matter, Barad proposes that we are interactively reconstituted as part of the world's becoming. And in fact, we are only a part of that nature that we seek to understand. So it's this co-evolution and coexistence that are the core ideas in my work. And on the more philosophical edge, this term also suggests a fundamental inseparability of the epistemological, ontological, and ethical considerations, which we kind of tended to see as separate spheres. So this inseparability offers an understanding of the role of human and non-human, material and discursive, and natural and cultural factors in scientific and other social material practices. In other words, we exist, and therefore we are responsible, are not separable from one another. And another critical term here is agency. French philosopher Bruno Latour's actor network theory is a very famous one in the fields of sociology as well, as far as I know. Like, that attributes agency to anything that has an effect, whether inanimate or animate, and therefore asserts that everything has agency. And agency is the ability to have an effect. I mean, our notion until recently of agency was different. We perceived it as the ability to act upon a will or something. But it's more expansive now. Like, anything that exists has an effect and therefore is an agent. And animal agency, to narrow this down, Richard Nimmo, again, in his work said, animal agency and animal being are not different from each other. So to be is to become effective or agential. So it's no longer a matter of intentional action. as long as we are within networks of or assemblages, everything is an agent. This relational existence obviously is reflected in animal agency in literature, and especially in the material discursive entities such as novels produced by the human animal. So I kind of try to explain this very briefly, the semiotic explosion because of the improvements in printing technologies in this period, the Anthropocene. And I kind of, from that, I arrive into something what I call the semantic humanimal, an extraordinary human animal who, in her or his conscious or unconscious entanglement, interacts with the world not only gesturally but also agentically through semiosis, through all kinds of signs, whether grammatical or not, by way of discursively, and also epistemologically inscribing them on matter by using the necessary tools like pen, paper, ink, paint, etc., and through the performance of her or his bodily extensions. The objects of the novel, the subjects of the novels, I've tried to cover and provide a new interpretation for. And then my point here is that these semantic humanimals of the period, these authors, they frequently interacted with both the semiotic signs of the horse and the real horse, the flesh and blood horse, and responded to these by assigning considerable amount of agency and labor on the equine species in these long prose narratives that depicted long sections of the lives of human characters who were in constant mobility. And that is kind of like a definition of what a novel is, as different from histories, as they were called in the earlier examples, like Robinson Crusoe or Afroban's Oronoco. We were made to believe kind of that they were real, factual pieces of writing. Now, to look at the literary examples in Joseph Andrews, the characters travel together, and then there's this particular focus on this method, a traditional method of traveling, when the two travelers set out together, one on horseback, the other on foot. And now, as it generally happens, that he on horseback outgoes him on foot. The custom is that when he arrives at the distance agreed on, he is to dismount, tie the horse to some gate, tree, post, or other thing, and then proceed on foot. When the other comes up to the horse, he unties him, mounts, and gallops on, till having passed by his fellow traveler, he likewise arrives at the place of tying. So this is called the ride and tie method of traveling, two persons having only one horse. The interesting thing is that the main events in the plot and revelations that drive the plot take place in this novel during the intervals when the two characters are physically distant from one another in writing and tying. So in fact, they take turns writing and tying not only the horse, but also the episodes of the story of the novel. And of course, there are other evidences from the text, such as like Joseph Andrews' ability to speak with the animals, is being a very good horseback rider. In fact, Fielding, I argue, was replicating and even simulating a particular form of the horse-human relationship as he organized the narrative and even the physical space of the paper he was using. I mean, he self-consciously explains to the reader why there are chapters and episodes in a novel and how they're like resting places for the reader, as in the ride and tie method. Jane Austen may be more familiar with audience as a figure who would not be, it's easy to call her a simulacrum of Englishness. Jane Austen is typical Englishness, an icon of representing 19th century landed gentry class, to which she herself belonged. She too was a semantic human animal who used typically English act of novel writing to create simulacra of Englishness. And in fact, she herself became one such simulacra of middle-class Englishness in due course. But then again, by depicting a patriotic Pride and Prejudice, that's the title of another novel, in her Gothic parody Northanger Abbey, she established the image of English gentlemen, the countryside English gentleman, traversing the countryside on the back of fine horses after the land enclosures of the 18th century. The striking example in the text is this character, John Thorpe, who is very proud of his horse and is measuring distance and time by taking his horse as reference point. Because there's this debate like how long it took or what the distance they covered was, and some other character says it was like, say, 8 miles. He says, no, it cannot be. It says, but do look at my horse. Did you ever see an animal so made for speed in your life? Such true blood. This thoroughbred horse, this thoroughbred Englishness in between the lines is what is also suggested. But look at his forehead, look at his loins, only see how he moves. That horse cannot go less than 10 miles an hour. Tie his legs and he will get on. I mean, there's other research, obviously. I'm not going to go in there, but the founding sire of this race of or breed of horses known as the thoroughbred were Turkmen horses that were captured after the second siege of Vienna from the Ottoman cavalry. But that's another story. So, I mean, this is also, in fact, an example of this entanglement of different cultures and histories as well, like the Ottoman and British histories. So, in other words, as anyone who would visit the National Gallery in London would see, I think it's on the 3rd floor, this life-size portrait of this horse, Whistle Jacket, another thoroughbred. It became a national icon of thoroughbred Englishness that were glorified by the countryside gentry who really understood fine horse flesh. And as Donna Landry, who's written productively and very, very continuously about these histories, she explained how the Whistle Jacket is a national icon perpetually among the top 10 most popular reproduced images at the National Gallery, emblematizing a shared national culture. Just like Jane Austen, like her image, her name is a simulacrum of Englishness as well, just like Whistle Jacket. And by drawing on that similarity, and again, to think about these entanglements of the human and the non-human, well, a claim at this conference some years ago that Jane Austen was a horse, a thoroughbred English horse, because they carry the same sign value. And of course, Jane Austen understood horse and horse-human relationships very internally. She interacted with them. The Bronte sisters, again, are a very similar example. There was an exhibition at the Bronte Parsonage Museum in 2015. But just to give a summary of the information here, they were very exposed to images, to real flesh and blood horses, even though the family did not own horses. Looks like there were 91 horses of various sizes that were recorded in the tax documents of 1831. when they lived in the area, and about half of these horses were ponies, 42 in total according to church records. So if anyone is familiar with the novel, all of these characters move on the Yorkshire moor, on the moor area, on the moorland, on the back of these ponies, and they provide this plot progression. The Galloway, and at some point it's Minnie, I think is the name of that pony, is described as a Galloway pony, a pony breed of Scotland and Northern England that was a strong, multi-purpose black or bay horse with a significantly long mane. And Emily Bronte, she saw these Galloways doing labor on a daily basis. And well, I argue I decided to assign some narrative labor and narrative agency on these horses in her novel too. There are several examples of how the characters are intermingled or entangled with horses and images of horses or references to horseness itself, you know. This Heathcliff, the great anti-hero in the novel of the period, is himself likened to a pony, a handsome black pony. And in fact, in the film versions, dressed in dark clothes with a dark face and long hair, just like these unreclaimed creatures that the ponies are, as different from horses. I mean, one can easily also assume at some point and strongly argue that, like, Heathcliff was a pony, a Galloway pony. Look at these images. This black, unreclaimed wild creature with a long mane. There are references in the novel to his hair looking like the horse mane. So, yeah, I mean, Emily Bronte also understood horses, and then why not? So she too was a pony. She was unreclaimed herself, just like the characters she created in this novel. Now, equine mortality, in the second section, I'm kind of running out of time, and I'll try to squeeze it into the remaining time. The agency of the dead horse, my point about that comes from this question Jeremy Bentham asked and Derrida capitalized on to understand subjectivity or sentience. Bentham said the question is not can they reason or can they talk, but can they suffer? Suffering is the reference point, he argued. And Derrida built on this, saying mortality is the most radical means of thinking the finitude that we share with animals, the mortality that belongs to the very finitude of life, to the experience of compassion. So perhaps this is where we are more or the most entangled with everything else, with the more than human world. We all die, basically. And as different from Descartes, the Cartesian logic of cogito ergo sum, like I think therefore I am, well, it sounds more meaningful to say morior ergo sum, I died, therefore I am. This is what defines, the end is what defines the beginning or the existence. And it's more to the point philosophically. And if we are now in this age of crisis, loss of biodiversity and cruelty and injustice, we are in need of developing a notion of animal mortality, a different notion of animal mortality, rather than being tied to the evidently limited and, well, to me, evidently hypocritical notion of human morality, to understand and acknowledge the agency of animals, both human and non-human, not just every living creature, basically. So this is our ethico-onto epistemological duty, I believe. And then George Eliot and Thomas Hardy, who were familiar with the work of Charles Darwin, I argue, they were aware of this and of this evolution and this entanglement of organic beings. In the Silas Marner novel by George Eliot, even though it's the story of this secluded character and his kind of regaining of the joy of life by the adoption of this baby girl, the precipitating events and the major ruptures in the narrative are all because of the death of a horse. This valuable hunting horse owned by the character Gottfried Cass, Wildfire. He turns out to be the only means by which this character can regain the rent money he has collected from the tenant for his father. But he, collects the money, but it's spent for drinking and gambling. And then in order to save himself from this very difficult situation, they decide to sell this very valuable horse. And they get a good bargain. And the Dunstan character, after selling the horse, he enjoyed the self-important consciousness of having a horse to sell and the opportunity of driving a bargain. And Eliot, remember, it was a prestige and something with a great exchange value, a good, fine horse was in the English countryside. So, but then we see Eliot's or narrator's comment on this event: horse dealing, one of many human transactions carried on in this ingenious manner, ends with Bryce's purchase of the horse for 120 to be paid on the delivery of Wildfire, safe and sound, at the Bartley stables. But the real climax of the novel comes when instead of taking the horse to the stables at once, this Dunstan is overcome by the inclination for a run, because like he's made a lot of money, he saved himself from this awkward situation, especially with a horse under him that would take the fences to the admiration of the field, the good jumper hunting horse. But the most climactic novel is when Dunstan took one fence too many and staked this horse. His own ill-favored person, this is from the narrator, which was quite unmarketable, escaped without injury. But poor Wildfire, unconscious of his price, turned on his flank and painfully panted his last. So, I mean, the narrator's voice even here empathizes with the horse rather than the human. And it's one of these illustrations of that scene in the novel. So this Wildfire horse creates a narrative wildfire because the second point here, the entanglement of the plots as an effect of the death of Wildfire is the very point at which Eliot's ethical and epistemological interaction really takes off, when a dead horse becomes powerfully agential, both in the narrative and in the entangled world of human and non-human beings. The stake that pierces Wildfire's body, in fact, also pierces the narrative of a novel that initially seems to be exclusively focused on the experience of the human characters. My last text is Thomas Hardy here. We're running out of time. As a representative of the naturalist movement in the English novel, he obviously has a wholly different stylistic philosophical approach to animals and their relationship to mankind. And his novels, this awareness takes shape in representations of death and suffering. And in this case, it is this horse called Prince, who has actual little exchange value, but no sign value at all, but is a necessary poor draft horse for the subsistence of this peasant family. And then to make long story short, it's Tess who needs to, travel with this horse to sell the beehives in the market in the middle of the night because her dad has fallen asleep because of these news about his blood ties with some ancient aristocratic family. Tess falls asleep and then eventually to be awakened by a hollow groan unlike anything she had ever heard in her life that proceeded from her father's poor horse, Prince. The scene is explained in the novel. She immediately discovers that the horse has been badly injured by the pointed shaft of the speeding morning mail cart that pierces him like a sword. Prince staggers, his life's blood spouting in a stream. And like a sword is that obviously reference to the aristocratic Norman knight background of his father and even, of course, Tess herself. So the entire tragedy of Tess is symbolically manifest in both the blood pool that was still visible in the middle of the road, and her tragedy obviously follows. So the theme of heredity or bloodlines, a very powerful idea that comes with the Darwin Revolution, is essential to this plot. Hardy seems to have expanded the understanding of the same great natural class and written from the larger Darwinian idea of interconnectedness of all species. And he actually argued that confused and conflated the tragedies of the human and the horse deliberately with that awareness. In this novel, the economic or use value of animals, first and foremost, the horse Prince, they get refracted back on the human characters, particularly on Tess. My conclusions, I'll try to finish here. The English novel grew into maturity within this semi-activity of this early Anthropocene period. And these semantic humanimals lived in an age when beliefs about the human's place and role in nature were beginning to be replaced with a new understanding based on interconnectedness, this entanglement. They also responded to these horses through ethical, auto-epistemological interaction and grafted their performance on matter by writing novels. The larger conclusion, obviously, for those who are interested, if you're into literary studies, it's not just horses. This applies to all the other non-human or the more than human world. Horses were literally everywhere in the novel of the period, not only in the streets or on the fields, but also in the names of the machinery that was ultimately to replace them. They were everywhere in the English novel in its formative centuries, carrying load, carrying narratives, carrying people, jumping fences, and galloping for miles on end. We failed to see them for a very long time. And here's a new perspective on literary studies, but they were and they are always there somewhere in the lines of these novels. Hopefully there's a new venue for literary studies, reading not for the human being but for the animal, and not just as a metaphor or symbol, but for what it is, for the flesh and blood animal, and for their experiences in these narratives. And before I finish, I would also like to invite everyone for this upcoming conference that we're organizing in May, with contributions from the esteemed keynote speakers like Paola Cavalieri. She's among the founders of the field of animal studies. Simon Estock and Douglas Wacoach, with around 110 papers by authors from 29 different countries. It'll be a hybrid conference on May 16th through 18th. And we will announce the Zoom links on the conference website. You're obviously welcome to join at least the online sessions, and then the in-person sessions will also be live streamed on YouTube. And well, thank you very much. And then with this last picture, with this last image here, I would also like to I will hopefully provoke some interest in critical animal studies. But there's this very important point I should stress. That's why I put my own photograph on a horse in this last slide. It's not something that can be really performed or understood by reading from books only. It's not just theoretical terminology or neologisms. One really has to be with the animal. That's what we were anyways. So without touching an animal, I mean, with reference to our estrangement from the modern human world in most societies, what it really takes is to really be with the animals as we have always been. So yeah, that's I think all I want to say. Thank you very much, and I'll be very happy to answer questions or listen to comments or contributions to this discussion.
Well, that was great. That was an unexpected topic that I will and everybody will listen, because in postgraduate school Erlangga University we don't have any specific animal studies, and that was very interesting to hear, Doctor. Well, if I may give a conclusion from what I've been listening, horses had many definitions, they have many values. Like example, back then in the 20th century, people used the horses for work, mobilization, and now it can be the icon of a wealthy family symbol, like a royal family. And regarding the novel, it can be a character when the two main role of the story are physically distinct from one another, just like a full of a human transaction also. Let me ask a question, because I was wondering, is there any possibilities to change horses with all of the value that indicate they interpreted the horses to another animals? I mean, is there any possibility to replace the horses?
Well, yes and no, as I was trying to explain. I mean, there are many other species that we have co-evolved with throughout history. Sheep, the cow, the dog, as I said, like we've been living together. The domestication of the wolf actually is what the dog is, like 15,000 years ago. And yes, but my emphasis on horses is only because, like, the political history of modernity most of the time, or like the medieval period, like we call the medieval English literature, one of these very famous or influential genres is the chivalric romance. And well, the name itself comes from le cheval, it's a horse in French. So without the horse, there's no medieval English literature, no Don Quixote. But yes, other animals, cows. I mean, in our modern societies, we are reliant on or dependent on the labor, and we extract. That's what I was trying to explain. I mean, in this chapter in Planet Work, edited by Ryan Heidegger, as different from this talk, there's a little more emphasis on the idea of extraction. We've been extracting labor. We've been extracting everything that we could from these animals. Donkeys, I mean, if we are to continue with the equid species, or they're everywhere. I mean, camels, not just the mammals. I mean, think about all the other, like, um, you know, I mean, many other animals, the avians, the fish. I mean, they're all over. In fact, there's this other theorist, Kerry Wolf, who is the author of this seminal work, What is Posthumanism? He also wrote this article, Human All Too Human, in an issue of the PMLA, this Journal of the Modern Language Association. He said something that kind of basically reads as, you know, the animal is everywhere in our language. So, and he says, trying to describe the field of animal studies is almost like herding cats. And you cannot herd cats. They're like animals with their own minds. But even in these idiomatic expressions, the animal is everywhere in our language and in our reality. So yes, the possibilities are endless. I don't recall now how many different species that we have discovered on the planet so far. But yes, every single one of them is a potential interest. I mean, look at this, what this one virus has been doing, and its agency and its effects on the entire human race in the past 2 years. I don't know if this is an answer.
That was a great answer. Thank you so much. I see we have a question. Let me read to you. Hello, Dr. Sinan. I ever read an article about Anthropocene dynamics. What is the difference Anthropocene with the novel meaning with the dynamics? And what is the effect for environment because the Anthropocene dynamics?
Anthropocene dynamics, is that what it is?
Yeah,
is there a way that could be, you know, is that in the chat box?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, now I see the chat box. All right. Anthropocene dynamics, what is the difference? What is the different Anthropocene with the novel meaning with the, and what is the effect for environment because well, yeah, to be honest, I'm not familiar with this term, Anthropocene dynamics, and I haven't read anything about it so far. You know, so yeah, excuse me, please excuse my ignorance. I will not be able to answer this question.
That's okay.
Because I have to see in what sense the word dynamics is used.
That's okay. That's okay. Totally fine. So, is there any question? Any more question, everyone? Enrico,
yeah, I was wondering if anyone in the audience is already familiar with these texts, or I don't know what their backgrounds are, but from you know, reading world literature, maybe some people are familiar.
Exactly.
Yeah, maybe I have a question, moderator. Okay, my name is Enrico, and actually my background is actually from law degree, so I haven't studied much about horses, but I want to ask you about the interpretation about horse riding as a masculine or strong figure. From my perspective, the usage of horse in the modern era, especially by the politician, to make their as a great figure, as a masculine, strong, like what Putin did. Putin have a photographer shirtless and riding a horse, and then after what happened in Ukraine and Russia, Putin used some sympathism of Putin use that photo to make the image that Putin is strong. Interpreted as someone riding a horse to make them strong, masculine. Is it? What I mean is it? Is it all the time that someone ride a horse must be a strong person, a powerful, maybe a leader? I get confused to interpret my English. I hope you get my point.
That's quite clear for me. Thank you very much for this interesting question. Well, I mean, we all know that like the world is full of statues of great men on powerful horses, like they are in the iconography of nation buildings and or imperial identity buildings. And it's not new, obviously. I mean, this idea of controlling, so to speak, or riding a horse, it has inspired entire philosophy of governance. Since you're from a law background as well, that might be of interest to you. When Charles II of England came back from exile to England, that's the return of the king, the Restoration Age begins. The first thing he does, because he's still Catholic and he's suspicious about conspiracies against him, he establishes the first personal guard of the monarch. It's called the Household Cavalry. It's still today exists as an army unit, and their stables are just in the St. James Park, very close to the Buckingham Palace. The Household Cavalry, as a kind of resonation of that idea of strictness and absolutism. Charles ordered this particular set of bits and bridles to be used in the imperial cavalry troops that would allow less freedom to the horse and more control to the rider. So yes, as you were saying, that's a very correct observation. This idea of manliness, this control, this absolutism has been, refracted on the horse-human relationship as well. But then, to answer your question, I mean, if it really, all you need to do is to make the horse feel that you know what you're doing. It's not about manliness. It's not about, it's not about the gender of the rider. The horse knows, I don't know if you've ever been on horseback, but then he knows you are an inexperienced rider, or she, and needs and senses that he or she needs to trust you, and because he or she will let herself to be controlled by you, and needs to develop a trust and confidence. And that confidence, the horse would know and sense if you know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, the horse would know and then would simply try to do what he or she wants only. So it's really about the human, but it actually takes some. I mean, I've been doing some horseback riding. I'm not really very professional. I'm still an amateur in this, but it takes physical readiness. It takes mental readiness, and knowledge about how to communicate with the horse. It's really not about manhood. Thank you very much for this question. But yes, I mean, this is how in our cultures they have been constructed, or again used. Their narrative labor was used in the construction of very strong political figures. Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And unfortunately, because the limited time, we have to close this guest lecture. So, Dr. Sinan, thank you so much. It was indeed, it was super epic presentation. It was indeed giving us a new perspective and knowledge to those of us who not familiar yet with the novel or the human horse. And yeah, looking forward to the further collaboration.
Yes.
Hope you are stay healthy and yeah, my name is Safira and goodbye everyone.
Yes, thank you very much again.
Thank you very much.
We too will look forward to hosting a speech by colleagues in your university, Erlangen University. We'll hopefully stay in touch to plan that and, you know, meet again sooner than later.
Yeah, hopefully. And Miss Idel, thank you so much for attending this lecture.
Thank you so much, Faye. It's such a pleasure to meet you finally. And thank you, Dr. Sinan. And it was so lovely to be here. I hope this event will be the first step of our many more collaborations. Thank you.
Absolutely. Please stay healthy and goodbye.
Yeah,
thank you very much. Yeah.
Kami memiliki visi untuk menjadi institusi yang berkelas dunia, mengembangkan pemimpin transformatif untuk membuat dunia lebih baik.